Okay, blue-eyed mummies. I've done a couple on different ones here and mummies and stuff here recently, and keep getting challenged by people. So I'm throwing a couple of different ones out there about it. And in the process of learning more, I find even more. It's amazing. There's blue-eyed mummies all over the place. It seems like the Caucasians that had a blue-eyed trait to them have been all the way through the tip of Asia, all the way down through Mongolia and down south on the other side of India. In fact, there's an Aryan thing with the India, and they, of course, they deny it and stuff, but then they turn around and tell you that they're a cross between Aryans and blacks a long time ago, and then got specialized by staying there, and then DNA kind of shows that. So, but all the people of the Levant and stuff seem to have this trait whenever you find bodies or you find, you can't, of course, it's a dead body and it doesn't have an eyeball. So what you're finding is effigies and pictures of them and things like this. And look at this intricate work here. This is incredible. It really is. You think about this is almost 4,000 years old. It's about 3,700 years old. And it's got blue lapis lazuli around his eyes, and then a special form of that blue lapis that's been polished incredibly, and it makes it look like an eye, especially his left one. You can tell they don't quite match, but man, they look good. And they had to find ones that had a miscolored spot in them and then try to center that miscolored spot. Can you kind of see that? Hopefully y'all can see that in there. Also, one thing I want you to notice is that the plaster is all coming off of it, but when they make these, they make all this stuff out of this red clay that they've got. And then they put different colors on it with plaster and stuff, which is really milked down more clay with dyes and colors in it that they match out. And you can still see some of it on him, although it's coming off around his nose over here on the side here. It's really still all evident. I mean, I'm sure you can pick that all up. But see right here, this band on the top of his head? If you look, the hair's always attached to that. This is this fake hair cap that they always have. And it seems to be woven and cropped down. But what we're finding now when we find the pharaoh's bodies is that whenever you pop off the cap, they still have some hair. Although they pretty much kept their hair shaved back then because they had an incredible lice problem. And they find mummies whenever they're looking at their hair and stuff, and they have lice in them just a little bit and stuff, and it's like, wow. So and even after going through the process, they have lice, so they must be getting them on them from even the people that are around them after they're deceased, and then getting trapped in there. You see that, right? So anyhow, and of course, this is one of the plagues that, and no, you know what, there's lice in Cambodia, there's lice everywhere. It ended up coming through with cattle and creatures like that and stuff, and it got real broke out. Maybe they had an incredible breakout one time, and they blame it on some divinity thing. But this forward cowling that's right here, under that, they actually have. Oh, sorry about that. They actually have another hair, and some of these mummies have shown some of this hair to be red, auburn, kind of a brownish tan, and even blonde. And so, let's look at a few of these here. Famously, King Tut's eyes are blue, but they're a real dark color. And then all the stuff around him is a real light blue lapis lazuli, like that guy's eyes were. In fact, look at this turquoise inlay here. So it doesn't show. I mean, it's kind of like you got to dip into it. So, and I've done one called Blue-Eyed Gods, and even like over in Japan, they have certain gods that have blue eyes, and so that's a strange effect. And they're finding these mummies all over the place, and these mummies, they're old as hell, and they've got this reddish blonde hair on them, which I think is neat and unique. And as they look at them, they can find that it's got this braided hair, but that's blonde. And they say, well, it's from the mummification process. And they go, this wasn't mummied, it's dehydrated. It's just dried out like freeze-dried. This is not an Egyptian mummy. This is someplace up in France they found them. And indeed, some of those frozen people they find up there that they've dated way back into even Stone Age times and past have that same effect. So it's kind of neat. But yeah, like blue-eyed gods, I showed how over even in India and through the Orient, they have a lot of these gods that have these blue eyes on them. I mean, it's pretty striking, and they have no problem with it, even though there's like 6 cultures that don't actually have a blue-eyed trait. And people get mad whenever they say, that they say, well, I took this skull of this ancient pharaoh lady, and whenever we reconstruct it, it ends up looking like this. And they go, oh no, they didn't make her nose wide enough, and look at her hair, she's black. Well, that's a wig anyhow. I mean, but yeah, I admit that looks like black cornrow hair, but wasn't that to copy the Egyptians? That look, I thought it really was back in the Bo Derek times and way before that, of course, but it became real popular when I was a kid again. So, they show you like King Tut. Looks like this, and he had an overbite on him, kind of a buck tooth, a little look to him, a little bit deformed. But now they found out, now this is an older depiction whenever they did this show, but now they found out he's got the blue-eyed gene. In fact, he 92% matches Eastern Europeans with a blue-eyed gene. In fact, as I said before, there's a lot of these blue-eyed gods of antiquity. Even Nefertiti herself has these blue lens things stuck in there that almost look a little crystally glass. There's this guy again I started it with down here, but you look through here, all the way through these ancient Ugarit everywhere. They have blue-eyed gods, Sumerians, and people are now finding out that the Sumerian and Arata people here looks like they go back 10,500 BC-ish. And that puts them at the end of the last ice age coming out of it. You can see all these things that they find with these bodies, and it probably didn't show up in the camera there, but that's blue eyes. It's that lapis lazuli, but it's got so much dust on it. I mean, all this has dust on it. But whenever they start wiping away the dust, the skin on this has been whitewashed a little bit, and then this right here is blue eyes. And that looks like Groot. Despicable Me, doesn't it? Anyhow, just doing what the hell. So here's all, there's blue-eyed gods like crazy through all of this, and a lot of these effigies they have, and even over here in South America, and this is a Mongol. There's a Mongol leader, and he was buried with the blue eyes, and then they look at this lady here and her hair, and they test it, and yeah, sure enough, looks like they were some type of Caucasoid race. Of course, well, Mongol Caucasoid Asian, that's the way it blends going right through there. But they have found this mummy. I swear there was a picture here, but I could show you the whole little documentary. But let me see if I can find it. Ding, 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 ding. And man, I've tried to find, because they say, oh, white people are doing those tests. And I don't want to sound weird when I say this, but the only black people I could find was this crew right here that's actually doing digs for them, right? And by the way, that's the one I just showed you a minute ago that was covered in dust. Ancient Blue-Eyed Mummies Unearthed. That's what it's called. And but there's black people in a lot of teams, but I don't guess there's a lot of black archaeologists that are out there maybe, and maybe if they want to find something, go look, but then you don't want to be embarrassed about it in any way, shape, or form. But they found this guy. Check this out. This is like 14,000 BC of not even totally a humanoid type. It still has its hair, and look how it's blonde. And they say this is a thing like a missing link character. This is like, you look at the evolutionary chart and it's got about 10 of them. This is like from the left, like number 4. And so maybe they didn't, what color hair did they have? Was it orangutangy? Was it this? Was it that? And everything. And sure enough. So anyhow, where is that one picture of this one mummy? Oh, here's one picture of him. It's not the same one I was talking about. But they found this up in China. This is way up in China. And there's this whole area that has these. And they have spires sticking up that look like Asherah poles. and each Asherah pole right in front of it has a dead person. It's almost like that was the very first tombstones. And each one of the poles is cut perfectly. Well, not so perfect anymore being out in the weather, but they're like hexagons and squares. They're geometric shapes and driven into the ground. I'll have to show you this. It's pretty neat. But and they found one here, and he's red as hell, and they're like, what? And he's painted up red, and he's got this symbol on him, these two circles and a symbol line, and he looks half Asian there and everything. Well, a lot of these mummies, when they suck in, look like that. This is an old man. He's got grayish blonde hair. It's just been painted, and they're saying that, yeah, it's actually a Caucasian person and not even an Asian. That predates. Here's that site. Here's the site right here. And see if I can get this focused in and look at the camera there. Okay, there. See, it's got all these Asherahs, and now they dug it up. This was a whole giant mound. And you can find this, it's White Mummy in China. And you'll find it. And it's got all these special little boat things. They're all made of rocks. And it's got people all buried in here, and every one of them's got these poles that are all long worn away. And the poles have to be taken from a long way away from here, or during a time way back whenever there was a forest in this area. This is in an area they call no man's land. So these little boat-looking things are all these rocks that are over it. And as you open it up, like this one's starting to be opened up, there's all these people in there. And look, they're like a Caucasian-y, almost just out of caveman kind of looking thing. And they've run DNA tests on them now, but I haven't heard the total results back on it and everything yet. But they have these blue stones they stick over their eyes on a lot of them. They've found a couple of jade green stones on a couple. And then they have a lot of them that don't have any stones at all. You're like, well, do they have any brown stone ones? It's like they don't have any stones at all. But it's only in about half of them they've found. There's like 160 of them. And about half of them that they'd uncovered, a lot of them, the stones appeared to have sunk down into their eyes where their eye was, and it's going to be sucketed down inside of them. But quite neat. And they're red-haired in China, and they predate actually the here's one of the articles on it. Yeah, they predate the Asian people having been on the Asian continent by over 1,000 years. Yeah, now they're running them through all the scan things and finding out, but they've already determined that they're good, that they come from Europe, and Asia, but they're not talking about China, Asia, because the article says they're before Asia. Here's another neat one here too. Here's Yua right here, and Yua. Oh man, are you gonna go to the page? It's gonna try to go to the page. Here we go. Let me go back. Sorry about that. Yua, which is who's known as Joseph II, or Joseph of the Bible, biblical Joseph, Egyptian prime minister during 1400 BC. They all talked about father of Tai, like the king of Tyre or something. No, well, Tai. Yua's blonde hair and Caucasian facial structure have been well preserved by the embalming process. And you look at him, he's got blonde hair. So they took a couple of strands of his hair and they checked it, and they go, no, it's not from the embalming process. That doesn't change their hair. In fact, here I'll show that to you. But there was another thing I wanted to show. Somebody said, oh, they faked that. They colored his eyes. It's like, no, that's him. That's the way it looks whenever you get it right. And, well, what about these? They're always black people. No. That hair thing is just a fake wig thing stuck on their head because they're all bald. Right? So, you get a lot of this effect like this going on with all these ancient pharaohs and the things that are buried in their little tomb sites. And most of them have been ravaged long, long ago. But they're finally starting to find, here's the other part of that crew that had the black people in it. They're starting to find these, and these, they're like the Wari civilization. And they're going, oh, that's black. And they go, well, they get blonde hair. and their masks got blue eyes. And so the people that used to live in that area before the Africans came through that area, way back when, maybe whenever they used to look not too much more than that, they used to bury these people and stuff, and they don't look like this. They're not caveman-y faced with big old, it's features. No. Whenever they take them out of there, they really look a lot like Europeans, they're saying. So, let me show you this video, or let me show you this other information here too real quick. This Science magazine, they were thinking they couldn't get DNA out of a lot of these guys, and so that one that you saw in the picture that had the blue eyes that looks like that's all grayed up and dirty, and they hadn't totally cleaned it, it's because it's kind of rotting away, and they don't want to mess with it anymore. And for its eyes, it seems to have this same kind of blue lapis lazuli of this color, and it's with all of her artifacts that go with her. And it was even inlaid on the side of this. But you can tell tarnish and stuff just ruins things over time. This all used to be like, I don't know, mahogany and inlays of 3 different colors, and really quite outstanding. In fact, here's her whole name coming down the side of here, right? And so what they have found here is that ancient Egyptian mummies preserve many details of the deceased, facial features, signs of illness, even tattoos, but not, it seemed, DNA. After repeatedly trying to extract it, many scientists were convinced that the hot desert climate and perhaps the chemicals used in mummification destroyed any genetic material a long time ago. Well, if you go on and read it, and I'll let y'all just stop and read it. A lot of times you get in front of me when you're trying to read it and things. I've tried to read along with people. So go ahead and read it. But the game-changing results give scientists their first insight into the genetics of ordinary ancient Egyptians, which changed surprisingly little through the centuries of conquests. And so what does it show? Well, they tell you here that these guys were trying to get DNA royal mummies, and they had, a bunch of them. And where they found them at, you can pause that and take a look at it there too. But they're trying to get mitochondrial DNA and radiocarbon dating and all this stuff off of them. And after collecting 151 mummy heads and trying to get the teeth out of it and everything, they were willing to say that they might have tainted them all, except for like 3 out of each little area that they had done. And so they felt even lucky with that. Out of 151 total, out of the, I don't know how many, I guess it's 3 areas, and that had different slight dating to them. And so they spanned 1,300 years of Egyptian history, from way back to Middle Dynasty. And so you can go on and read this, where they talk about mitochondrial DNA and how it holds from the parents and comes down from the woman but doesn't show from the man and stuff. And they were worried about contaminated tests. They ended up with nuclear genome samples of 3 mummies from each different time period. Okay? Cross's team compared the mummies, mitochondrial, nuclear, ancient, modern to popular Near East and Africa. They discovered that ancient Egyptian closely resembled ancient and modern Near Eastern populations, especially those in the Levant. What's more, genetics of the mummies remained remarkably consistent even as different powers conquered the empire. It's possible that the mitochondrial genome simply don't record the genetic contributions of fathers, but that shouldn't be. A molecular geneticist at the National Research Center at Cairo, founder of Egyptian Fusion DNA Lab, worked with zinc on past mummy studies, and 3 mummies with nuclear genome data show striking genetic continuity, Christ points out, that even though they're totally done separate. And so he says, later, however, something did alter the genomes of Egyptians, later. Although the mummies contain almost no DNA from sub-Saharan Africa, some 15 to 20% of modern Egyptians' mitochondrial DNA, the people that live there now, reflect sub-Saharan ancestry. So he's saying the people that live there now reflect some sub-Saharan ancestry, but the old ones don't show any mix. And it's really unexpected what we see, this very late shift, Krauss says. He suspects increasing trade along the Nile including the slave trade or the spread of Islam in the Middle Ages, may have intensified contact between northern and sub-Saharan Africa. And so a new model kind of shows up instead of the Afrocentric model where you have it all came out of there. In fact, there's another model going out that people are saying that, well, they're telling you they got literally thousands of mummies to keep checking on and stuff. But, you know, you look at monkeys, and monkeys have tan skin and they got black skin. And what they decided on that is that the black skin monkeys, like bonobos, this one right here, and gorillas, are actually an adaptation for being out in the sun, to where they don't burn as much and have to hang up under the trees as much, can hang out in the open, and that it's very possible that early man was a brownish tan color, and in Africa, trapped there during the last ice age, they developed this adaptation which made it to where they could absorb light a whole lot more. You know, white reflects light and black absorbs it. If you ever wore a black shirt versus a white shirt, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Or if you've ever had a black interior on a car on a Texas summer and get in it, you'll know what I'm talking about. So it absorbs heat a lot more, and it would have been an adaptation that helped to keep them alive during the last ice age, a specialty thing that showed up for them. It almost shows in Eskimos and stuff. They have this real darkening, and if you look up Eskimos, all the old ones and people that stay out in the sun look real dark, but the people that now stay inside don't get as much light and stuff, and they really are a lot more pale and kind of look a lot like Asians. So anyhow, there's that, and let's look at this other thing, and I'll finish it off with this video here that shows the new findings on Egyptian. So you're really not going to... One, that's your phone call. Mummy. And it should show up right here. Okay. So let's look at this. I'll turn it up good for you.
Hi, it's Mike Chan. What we're going to be talking about in this video is what some people may consider a controversial subject, as with most videos on this channel, but also one worthy of study. And before we start, I'm going to raise this question to everybody. Do we really know, genetically speaking, where ancient Egyptians came from? And the answer is, we have our theories, but not really. We also don't know what exactly they look like. When we try to imagine what ancient Egyptians may have looked like, some of us immediately picture a civilization populated by citizens with dark skin and dark hair, but was that truly the case? At the time when graves of mummies were discovered more than 100 years ago, a general expectation was that the early Egyptians were of Negroid origin. But in our enlightened and technologically advanced era, where we possess greatly enhanced capabilities in forensic science, certain mind-blowing archaeological discoveries and evidences have emerged that are not exactly supportive of the seemingly universal known fact that dynastic Egyptians were exclusively of African origin. All shades of hair were found around the time of ancient Egypt's civilization, from brown to blonde and even auburn and red. Today, these hair colors are found among the people of North Europe and North Africa and are indicative of Caucasian origins. So does this mean that there were fair-skinned, blonde, or red-headed ancient Egyptians prior and during Egypt's dynastic period? There is a theory suggesting that prior to 2000 BC, Egyptians were of Caucasoid European ethnicity. This is supported by the physical anthropology of the oldest mummies that have ever been found. The busts and the statues of several pharaohs and their wives, the colored wall paintings discovered, and the descriptions provided in historical accounts. As early as 5000 BC, the majority of the Caucasoid European occupants of Egypt were believed to have begun abandoning the increasingly warm country and headed to the cooler climates of Europe. Then after about 1500 BC, the population in the area became increasingly mixed, with the Nubians from the south of Egypt, which explains the typical physical appearance and genetic makeup of modern-day early Egyptians. This theory strongly refutes the ideas of Afrocentrism with the presentation of several archaeological, anthropological, and forensic evidences, 3 of which I am about to discuss with you now. One of the most famous cases of mummies of ancient Egypt that had red or blonde hair is one of the Gibelline pre-dynastic mummies, which is housed in the British Museum, commonly referred to by curators in the public as Ginger. This ancestor from ancient Egypt died more than 5,000 years ago in the late pre-dynastic period, around 3400 BC or earlier. His mummified body was found in a cemetery at Gibelline, Egypt, with his toes and fingernails perfectly preserved.
Did you see that blonde hair? It was all curly?
Ginger because of his golden curly hair, which interestingly looks similar to the curly locks often seen on Greek and Roman sculptures. And although his body is stained from buried in the sand for more than 5,000 years, this Egyptian ancestor looked like he once had yellowish white skin. Another example of uncovered red-haired mummies from ancient Egypt are the ones found among thousands of other mummies by a group of archaeologists in the Fagol Gamis graveyard in the south of Cairo. Archaeologists from Brigham Young University in Utah have been excavating that cemetery for about 30 years, and they have established that many of the mummies they have found date back to 30 BC, which is around the time when the Roman or Byzantine Empire ruled Egypt. Researchers reached the conclusion that there were more than 1 million bodies within the cemetery, and it was revealed that the cemetery was not intended for royalty, but for the common people. There were many interesting discoveries that were uncovered in the excavation of this ancient cemetery in the analysis of the mummies found buried in the area, and one of them is the observation that the mummies appeared to be clustered together according to their hair color. They found blonde-haired mummies in one area, while another area was filled with red-haired ones. This led to the overall impression that the clusters of mummies buried by hair color in the graveyard could be indicative that these people once belonged in the same family groups and therefore were related with each other. This also speaks volumes of the possibility that a small but significant part of ancient Egypt's population were red-haired or blonde-haired individuals. The last case of red-haired Egyptian mummies we will be discussing is the preserved body of Ramses II, who is arguably the most famous of all the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Ramses II ruled as a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty between 1279 to 1213 BC. It is believed to be the one who reigned when the children of Israel were liberated through the prophet Moses. In 1975, the Egyptian government tasked French scientists to attempt the preservation of Ramses' mummy. This opened an opportunity for researchers to determine his age, body condition, health, diet, and even his racial affinities. There were those who were of the opinion that Ramses II was black. However, according to the study conducted by Professor P.F. Scaldi and his research team, microscopic examinations of the pharaoh's hair roots showed that his hair had natural red pigments, which meant that in his younger years, Ramses II was a redhead. Moreover, it was also determined that Ramses had wavy hair, and a combination of these features meant that the pharaoh was fair-skinned. While there have been enough evidence for some experts to conclude that some ancient Egyptians were blonde or red-haired, there are still many researchers who believe that there were no ancient Egyptians whose natural hair weren't dark brown or black. Some of these skeptics argue that mummies found with light-colored strands of hair can be explained by the effects of the mummification process itself. And so, to find a definitive answer to this intriguing question about the effects of the mummification process on human hair, Dr. Jeanette Davey from the Victoria Institute of Forensic Medicine in Australia decided to conduct experiments on 16 hair samples from men and women aged between 4 and 92 years old. Most of the hair samples were dark colored, but for comparison, one of the sample strands was gray, while another one was fair. There was also one strand with henna on it. Davey and her colleague, retired industrial chemist Alan Elliott, also prepared some powder of synthetic natron for their experiments. Natron was a type of salt that was applied on the bodies during the process of mummification to dry them out. It has also been linked to the supposed change in hair color of the human remains. Davey and Elliott covered the hair samples in synthetic natron for 40 days, the same amount of time believed to be required back in ancient times to dry out the human body. When the 40-day period had passed, the samples were removed from the salty powder, and after undergoing microscopic analysis, it was determined that there was no change in the color of the hair samples at all. For Dr. Davey, the result of her experiment is convincing enough to say that fair-haired Egyptians did exist in ancient Egypt. It's just that finding fair-haired blonde-haired Egyptian mummies has so far been a very rare occurrence. Some ancient Egyptians could have been blue-eyed blondes or redheads, and while the country during those times was not as multicultural as several parts of the world are today, there were certainly a variety of racial mixes that made the existence of fair-skinned Egyptians possible. Now, is this discovery particularly earth-shattering? Well, it depends on which vantage point you are analyzing the evidence from. It remains a fact that a majority of Egyptians today are dark-haired and dark-skinned. These archaeological, anthropological, and forensic evidences merely attest to a not-so-implausible reality that at some point in its ancient history, there were a portion of people in Egypt who were red, were blonde-haired, and fair-skinned. I mean, in our modern world, individuals of different race and ethnicities encounter and mingle with each other like a natural habitat. So is it really that surprising that our ancestors did the same thousands of years ago? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you.
I like Mike. He's got a bunch of weird stuff on. You need to check that out. Beyond Science. I mean, he's just got weird stuff and just the, comments about things. It's pretty neat. He has, but yeah. So people see things like this and they just get all mad. But they're saying this is the way this guy looked, but actually he had orangish hair, and now they're saying that that's not actually even from the actual embalming process itself, and that he wouldn't even look like this with the gray hair, that it still was kind of red. So red, blonde, tall Egyptian mummies. Here you go. Here's that white, ancient white mummies of Asia. You see this right here? I'm not gonna. It's 47 minutes long. I'm not gonna, bore you with all of it and stuff. I tell you what, though, right here for the last seconds, I'll flip onto it and show you some info they've got.
Moved the search to southeastern Taklamakan.
So they move up into this area.
They struck gold. Several hundred tomb sites were discovered. They found a mummified infant wrapped in purple wool. The eyes were covered in colored stones to keep the lids closed. A second grave was completely undisturbed and provided the most spectacular mummies found to date. The male, nicknamed Churchun Man, must have cut quite a figure when alive. Archaeologists calculated he stood nearly 2 meters tall.
About 6 foot tall.
Even in death, the features of his face were strong, his blonde eyelashes and beard intact. A female mummy, Churchun Woman, had yellowish-brown hair arranged in 4 braids. The preservation was so complete that the couple seemed more asleep than dead.
Well observed. But it's because they're freeze-dried, really, out there in the desert. So
Individual never healed.
They found another guy here, which I'll just show you a moment of, but he just recently had surgery on him too. And so it looks like they tried to heal this guy who was having a trouble. Something, who knows, maybe something went wrong in his chest and lungs, and they're thinking probably the sand and dust from the area, or too much soot from campfires got in there and stuff. But they do critical analysis like this on them, and they find out that
Anthony looked for clues to early Caucasian horseback riding at the base of the Ural Mountains, part of the...
And they go on to do this, and they figure out that now the horses they can find, they come all the way through here. Of course, they run all the way through. And horses really always seem to be a northern thing. They got donkeys and stuff down here in the Bible and everything. They don't really have them. And then you're running into camels and stuff down here and across, but you're not really seeing many, just like the elephants that were up here apparently are gone, and the only place they're left is down in Africa. So, yeah, interesting, though. And this is the Discovery Channel thing, too. So you may want to check it out, Ancient White Mummies of Asia, because it's neat. They tell you right here, Caucasians roamed China's Tarim Basin 1,000 years before East Asian people arrived, Asian Caucasoids. Tall people with red or blonde hair and light eyes. So I think it's just kind of neat. I mean, I always thought there were different people going here, there. Well, now we have DNA to where they're not just looking at stuff and dead mummies and crap. They're looking at what did make that person and stuff, and they know enough about DNA and how it works to where they're like, wow, okay, well, here's what those people look like and here's where they came from. And yeah, very interesting. Like if you like it. If you don't like it, man, I'm sorry, but it seems to be the truth. So we need to, chill, because look, back in Egypt, it looked like we were all cool. You know, in the Bible, they talk about a time that everybody was working together, and then the Tower of Babel went ape shit, and everybody lost their languages. Maybe kind of that's what they're talking about, is way back then. Of course, we find out Sumeria, the other blue-eyed people, was actually the origin. It seems like they're the oldest writing way before Egypt, going a couple of thousand years before, and perhaps they're the Arata people that go back to 10,500 BC, and that puts a whole nother scope on it. They don't seem to have writing, but they do have quite a few Stonehenge type monuments out there that have quite a few depictions onto them, and it's quite incredible. Look up Arata, and it'll show you some of the neatest things about it. Anyhow, enjoy it. Appreciate y'all.